Serrated table knife scrapes against compacted earth in total darkness. 10 feet underground, a man lies on his stomach in a tunnel no wider than his shoulders. Above him, guard dogs patrol electrified fences. Watchtowers sweep searchlights across Sachsenhausen, a Nazi concentration camp where over 100,000 people have died. He is digging toward a point 110 meters away with a kitchen utensil. Each stroke of the blade removes a fingernail's worth of dirt. The air is thin. The walls press against his ribs. And if the SS discovers what is happening beneath their feet, he won't be sent to a cell. He's already inside a death camp. He'll simply be killed. 6 months ago, 50 of his friends were marched to roadsides across Germany and shot in the back of the head. Their crime was escaping a Nazi prison camp. Every authority in his world told him the same thing afterward. Stop, it's over. There is no way out. He picked up a table knife and started scraping anyway. How did a man end up digging underneath a Nazi death camp with a kitchen utensil? And what did the Nazis do when they found out what was happening beneath their feet? March 24th, 1994. Stalag Luft III, a prisoner of war camp in Lower Silesia. 76 Allied officers crawl one by one through a tunnel they spent a year building. 365 feet of it, carved beneath the camp with improvised tools, shored up with bedboards, ventilated with hand-pumped air lines. It was the most ambitious escape in the history of warfare, and the 39th man to pull himself through that tunnel and emerge into the frozen night was a British officer named Bertram Arthur James. Everyone called him Jimmy. Jimmy James and his escape partner moved fast. They'd prepared disguises as Yugoslav laborers, carried forged papers, and headed for the nearest train station. The plan was to blend in, move south, disappear into the chaos of wartime Europe, and for a few hours, it worked. Then a railway policeman looked too closely at their documents. Something in the accent didn't match the ink on the page. The policeman's hand came up. James and his partner never made it off the platform. It seemed like a routine failure. Escape attempts from POW camps happened constantly. Men got caught, got sent back, got a few weeks in solitary confinement, and started planning the next attempt. That was the game. The Germans understood it. The prisoners understood it. There were rules. 73 of the 76 escapees were recaptured. James sat in a holding cell and waited for the transfer back to camp. He expected the usual punishment. A stint in the cooler, reduced rations, maybe a lecture from the commandant. He had no way of knowing that the rules had just been shattered. Adolf Hitler was furious. The escape had humiliated the Luftwaffe, embarrassed the Reich's security apparatus, and generated headlines across the Allied world. He ordered all 73 recaptured men executed, every single one. Hermann Goering intervened, not out of mercy, but out of calculation. If Germany murdered 73 Allied officers, the Allies would retaliate against Luftwaffe prisoners in their own camps. Goering negotiated the number down, not to 0, to 50 men, James's friends, his tunneling partners. Men he had slept beside in the same barracks for a year. Men who had taken turns hauling sand out of the escape shaft. Men who had shared cigarettes and forged documents and whispered plans in the dark. They were taken in small groups to roadsides across Germany. The Gestapo told them to step out of the cars to stretch their legs. Then they were shot in the back of the head. James didn't learn the details all at once. The information arrived in fragments, a name here, a rumor there, then the official count. 50 dead. The selection had been arbitrary, bureaucratic, a list compiled by men who weighed political consequences the way an accountant weighs columns of figures. James's name was not on the list. He never learned exactly why. Goering's arithmetic had spared him. Not justice, not mercy, just the mathematics of reprisal calculations. But he was not returned to Stalag Luft III. He and 7 others were singled out, separated from the remaining prisoners and loaded onto a transport. No one told them where they were going. The guards offered nothing. The SS had already drafted an execution order with his name on it. James didn't know that yet. What he knew was the gate opening, the hum of electrified fences, the watchtowers standing close enough to overlap their searchlights. Beyond the inner perimeter, a much larger camp stretched out, vast and gray and silent. The truck had carried him east through German countryside, past checkpoints, through towns where civilians averted their eyes. Now it had delivered him to the place where that execution order was waiting. The only reason he would survive the next 12 months was a bureaucratic delay. An SS officer was waiting. He looked James up and down with the bored satisfaction of a man receiving a delivery he'd been expecting. His words were precise. Herr James, this is a nice place. You will not escape from here. James was escorted through the inner gate of the Sonderlager, the special compound. Inside, he found a handful of prisoners he recognized, men from the Great Escape who had also been spared and transferred. Among them was Wing Commander Harry Day, the senior British officer. Day looked at James with an expression that held no hope and no pretense. The only way out of here is up the chimney. James had just entered Sachsenhausen concentration camp. What could a man possibly do inside a death camp designed so that no one ever left alive? And what happens when the SS discovers someone has been digging beneath their feet with a bread knife? James counted the watchtowers. 6, each positioned so their sight lines overlapped. Triangular geometry that left no blind spot in the entire compound. He walked the perimeter the way he always walked perimeters. Cataloging. The electrified fences, voltage high enough to kill on contact. The strip of raked gravel along the inner perimeter, a no-man's land where any footprint would be spotted within minutes. Guard dogs on fixed circuits. Over 100,000 people had already confirmed the message with their lives. Executions, medical experiments, starvation, gas chambers. Death was not a risk at Sachsenhausen. It was the camp's daily output. And somewhere inside this machinery, James had already spotted the one flaw its architects had missed. The SS bypassed the main camp entirely and delivered James to the Sonderlager, a special compound reserved for prisoners considered either too valuable or too dangerous for general population. The compound was tiny. 2 barracks, ringed by electrified wire, a patrol path where a guard walked a dog on a fixed circuit, and beyond that, a 10-foot wall crowned with still more electrified wire. A prison inside a death camp. The other inmates told James everything he needed to know about the caliber of men the Nazis had caged here. Jack Churchill, the British commando famous for charging into battle with a broadsword. Peter Churchill, an SOE agent captured behind enemy lines. 4 Irish soldiers the Germans had tried and failed to turn into saboteurs. 2 Russian generals. 2 Polish RAF officers who bore the marks of Gestapo interrogation on their bodies. These were people the Third Reich considered dangerous enough to lock inside a cage within an already inescapable cage. James understood what the transfer meant. After the 50 murders, any further escape attempt would not be treated as a POW infraction. It would be treated as an act of defiance against the Reich itself. The punishment would not be solitary confinement. It would be death. And not the quick death of a bullet at a roadside. Whatever the SS decided, Himmler had already ordered their execution once and rescinded the order only because someone in the bureaucracy decided the paperwork wasn't worth the trouble. There was no reason to believe he would show restraint a second time. The rational choice was obvious. Wait. Wait for the war to end. Wait for liberation. Do not provoke the people who murdered your friends. Every officer in the compound understood this. Every officer accepted it. But James couldn't stop looking. He walked the perimeter of the compound the way he had walked every perimeter of every camp he'd ever been held in, studying the angles, measuring distances with his eyes, and he noticed something. The corner of one barrack sat close to the outer wire, not close enough to reach directly, but close enough that a tunnel, starting from beneath the floorboards and dug at the right angle, might pass under the electrified wire, under the patrol path, under the 10-foot wall, and emerge on the far side. The distance was roughly 110 meters. He looked at what he had available. Table knives from the mess hall, small, serrated, meant for cutting bread. He did the math. It was insane. But what does it actually feel like to dig through 110 meters of compacted earth with a bread knife? And what happens when a guard's boot stops directly above the tunnel entrance? James approached the other prisoners. He wanted to dig. With what? A table knife. Through what? Through 110 meters of compacted earth, 10 feet below the surface, underneath every layer of security the SS had built to make escape impossible. Everyone in the compound knew what discovery would mean. They wouldn't be sent to death row. They were already inside a death camp. They would simply be killed. James picked up a knife. He started scraping. James and Sidney Dowse became the primary diggers. They worked from beneath the floor of the barrack, prying up boards and lowering themselves into the crawl space, then cutting a shaft straight down, 10 feet, straight into the earth. Their tool was a small serrated table knife. Not a pickaxe, not a shovel, not even a proper blade. A knife designed to cut bread at a mess hall table. The earth beneath Sachsenhausen was compacted, dense, packed tight by decades of footsteps and construction above. Each stroke of the knife removed a fingernail's worth of dirt. James and Dowse took turns. One man scraped while the other hauled the loosened soil back in whatever container they could improvise. A tin cup, a sock, their bare hands. The pace was agonizing. Centimeters per session. They measured progress in days, not meters. Once the shaft reached 10 feet, they turned horizontal. Toward the wire, toward the wall, toward the far side of the road where a ditch ran along the camp's outer boundary. 110 meters of darkness ahead of them. The first problem was the dirt. Digging produces earth, and earth has to go somewhere. At Stalag Luft III, the great escape tunnelers had scattered their excavated sand across open fields and gardens, letting it blend into the landscape. Sachsenhausen's Sonderlager had no gardens, no open fields, no ground that wasn't under constant surveillance. The compound was a concrete and gravel box watched by guards who had nothing to do all day except watch. James and the others devised the only solution available. They packed the excavated earth beneath the floorboards of the barrack, pressing it flat in thin layers, distributing the weight so the floor wouldn't bulge during inspection. What none of them knew was that the SS had scheduled a full barracks inspection, one that would bring guards walking directly over the tunnel entrance. That inspection was 12 days away. The second problem was air. At 10 feet deep and dozens of meters long, the tunnel had no ventilation. The digger worked in near total darkness, lying flat on his stomach in a space no wider than his shoulders, breathing the same air over and over as oxygen depleted with every exhale. They rigged a crude system to push air down the shaft, but it was barely functional. Here's what the work actually felt like. You lay on your stomach in complete darkness, in a space so tight you could not roll over, and you scraped at compacted earth with a dull knife while your lungs burned and the walls pressed against your ribs and the ceiling pressed against your back. You could hear your own heartbeat. You could hear the blood pulsing in your ears, and above you, muffled but unmistakable, you could hear the footsteps of guards walking their patrol routes. The scrape of boots on gravel, the panting of dogs. Every sound you made with the knife traveled through the earth in ways you couldn't predict. Every cough, every shift of your body, every scrape of metal on dirt was a signal that could reach the surface and end your life. 4 months passed in centimeters. May through September 1944. The serrations on the knife wore smooth. They sharpened it on stone and kept going. 10 meters, 20, 40. Then came the moment that nearly ended everything. There were moments when discovery seemed certain. Guards conducted inspections of the barracks, boots walking across the floorboards while men lay frozen in the tunnel below. Not breathing, not moving. Listening to the wood creak and groan above their heads under the weight of jackboots, waiting for the sound of boards being ripped up. One inspection, a guard paused directly above the shaft entrance. His boots stopped. The wood bowed slightly under his weight. Below him, pressed flat against the cold earth, James could see a hairline crack of light between the boards and the sole of a German boot. The guard shifted his weight. The board settled. The boots moved on. Sounds from the tunnel reached the surface at unpredictable moments. A scrape that was too loud. A shifting of earth that sent a faint vibration through the ground. Each time the danger passed. Each time the digging resumed. But the near misses accumulated like debts. The odds of detection grew worse with every passing week, not better. 4 months is a long time to keep a secret in a compound the size of a tennis court. By September 1944, the tunnel had reached the estimated distance. James pushed the knife upward through the ceiling of the tunnel. Soil crumbled. Light filtered down through the cracks. He pushed again, and the blade broke through into open air. He could see the sky. They were past the electrified wire, past the patrol path, past the 10-foot wall. The exit was in a ditch on the far side of the road, exactly where James had calculated it would be 4 months earlier, when he'd stood in the compound with a bread knife in his hand and an idea that should have been impossible. The tunnel worked. 5 men would go. James, Jack Churchill, Harry Day, Johnny Dodge, and Sidney Dowse. They would travel in pairs. James and Churchill would head north toward the Baltic coast, aiming for a ship to Sweden. The breakout was set for the night of September 23rd, 1944. One chance. If the tunnel was discovered before all 5 men got through, whoever remained inside would not see morning. Night fell on September 23rd. The 5 men lowered themselves into the shaft one by one. James went first, crawling on his stomach through 110 meters of tunnel he had carved with a table knife. The earth pressed against him from every side. The air was thin and stale. Behind him, 4 men followed in single file, each one pulling himself forward through darkness toward a sliver of open sky at the far end. Above them, guards walked their pattern. Dogs circled the perimeter. Searchlights swept the compound in slow arcs. The camp did not know what was happening beneath its feet. But would all 5 men make it through before dawn? And what would the SS do to anyone they caught on the other side of the wire? All 5 men emerged from the tunnel into the ditch on the far side of the road. For a moment they crouched in the darkness listening. No shouts, no sirens, no dogs barking in alarm. They scattered into pairs and vanished into the night. James and Churchill headed north, following the Berlin-Rostock railway toward the Baltic coast. The night air hit James's face like cold water after months of breathing recycled underground air. Open sky, stars. For the first time in months, in years, he was outside the wire. He was free. They walked at night and hid during the day. They jumped a goods train heading toward Neustrelitz, riding in the darkness between freight cars while the countryside rolled past in shadows. They slept in woods, ate vegetables stolen from station gardens, kept moving north. At one point, they encountered a group of Russian prisoners who shared what little food they had. Strangers helping strangers in the middle of enemy territory, no words exchanged. Just a tin of cold potatoes pushed across the ground and a nod. For several weeks, James and Churchill moved through the collapsing Reich, getting closer to the coast with every night's march. The war was ending. Germany was crumbling from both sides. Sweden was close. The plan was working. Then, it stopped working. And what the Nazis did to James next was designed to be worse than the bullet they'd given 50 others. James and Churchill were asleep in a wooded area when 3 members of the Volkssturm stumbled upon them. The Volkssturm, the German Home Guard, old men and teenagers pressed into service as the Reich ran out of real soldiers. There was no dramatic confrontation, no gunfight, no chase through the forest, just 2 exhausted men caught sleeping by 3 amateurs with rifles. After everything, after the Great Escape, after the 50 murders, after Sachsenhausen, after 4 months of scraping through earth with a bread knife, after 110 meters of tunnel, after weeks on the run, it ended with someone tapping them awake. What happened next was not a bullet. It was something the SS had engineered to be far worse. What do you do to a man you don't want to kill but want to destroy? And how does a man survive a room built specifically for that purpose? James was transported back to Sachsenhausen, but he was not returned to the Sonderlager. He was taken to the Zellenbau, the cell block, death row. The door closed behind him. The cell was barely large enough to stand and stretch his arms. He was alone, and he did not know if he would ever leave that room alive. The Zellenbau. James spent over 4 months in that box. A cell so small the walls seemed to breathe when the light changed. No window large enough to see the sky. No voice except the guards who came for him at irregular intervals. They pulled him from his cell, marched him outside into the gray compound air, lined him up against a wall, and aimed their rifles at his chest. He stood there, feet apart, hands at his sides. He waited for the shots, his body braced for the impact, muscles locking, breath catching in his throat. The shots didn't come. They lowered their weapons. They took him back to his cell. Then they did it again and again. Mock executions. Each time, adrenaline spiked so hard his vision narrowed to a point. Each time, his legs went numb, and his bladder loosened, and his body prepared to stop existing. Each time it didn't happen, and each time the relief lasted only until he heard boots in the corridor again. Tomorrow, or the next hour, or in 5 minutes. After the rifles lowered, his hands shook for hours. He couldn't make them stop. He pressed them flat against the cell wall until the stone leached the tremor out of his fingers. Then the boots came back. The rations were a bowl of thin soup and a heel of black bread. He had no information about the war. The silence where another voice should have been filled every hour. He had no way of knowing whether liberation was days away, or years away, or never coming at all. The walls were close enough to touch from the center of the cell. The only sound was the guards breathing on the other side of the door. What James did not know was that Himmler had already ordered the execution of the Sachsenhausen special prisoners. The order was drawn up, approved, ready to be carried out. The commandant of the camp, the architect who designed it, the security officer, and the guard who had been on duty the night the tunnel was used were also scheduled for execution. The SS punishing its own for allowing 5 men to crawl out from under their feet with a bread knife. He lived because paperwork moved slowly. Someone in the bureaucracy decided the SS was writing off too many trained killers, and the execution order was rescinded. In February 1945, the Red Army advanced from the east. The SS began evacuating prisoners. James and the other prominent were moved south, not toward freedom, deeper into the collapsing Reich. They passed through Flossenburg concentration camp, where the stench of the crematorium hung in the air like fog. Then Dachau, where skeletal figures watched from behind wire with eyes that had stopped registering new arrivals. 2 more circles of the same hell. The war was ending, but for James, the danger was intensifying. As the Reich disintegrated, the SS grew more unpredictable, more desperate, more murderous. Standing orders to execute all remaining prisoners could come at any moment from any officer with a pistol and a grudge. There was no tunnel to dig here. There was no knife to pick up. Could a man who survived mock executions and 4 months in a box outlast the final days of a collapsing Reich? And what would James do with his freedom if he ever got it back? May 3rd, 1945. The Austrian Tyrol. American troops reached the compound where James and the other prisoners were being held. The SS guards had already fled into the mountains. James walked out into the daylight as a free man for the final time. He was 30 years old. He had spent 5 years as a prisoner. He had attempted to escape 13 times. He had survived the Great Escape, the murder of 50 friends, a concentration camp, a 110-meter tunnel dug with a table knife, recapture by amateurs with rifles, 4 months on death row, mock executions designed to shatter his mind, and transit through 3 concentration camps as the Reich burned itself to ash around him. The military cross came first, then the diplomatic service. And then he did something that no man who had survived mock executions, a bread knife tunnel, and the murder of 50 friends was obligated to do. He went back. As the British representative on the International Sachsenhausen Committee, James returned to the camp that had tried to erase him, not as a prisoner, as a witness, as the man who would make sure the world remembered what happened inside those fences, what was done to the 100,000 who never walked out. He wrote Moonless Night, the memoir that documented everything. Every detail, every name, every meter of that tunnel scraped out of the earth one fingernail at a time. Jimmy James lived to 92. He died peacefully in Shropshire in 2008. He outlived the Third Reich by 63 years. The SS officer at the gate had told him he would never escape. Harry Day had told him the only way out was up the chimney. Every authority in his world, his captors, his allies, the architecture of the camp itself, had told him the same thing. Stop, it's over. There is no way out. He picked up a table knife and said no. The chimney was not the only way out. If you want to see what happens when hundreds of prisoners inside a Nazi death camp secretly copy an armory key under constant surveillance, arm themselves in minutes through a human chain, ignite a revolt that begins seconds too early, and still set the entire camp ablaze so completely the Nazis try to erase it from history, click here.